I wanted to be part of this world of art, express myself to what was happening in the world.
I can only wish there were more experiences like this in my life.
This was one of those milestones, a kind of privilege that it's almost as if it was a dream.
I find it very exciting to be around creative people. And John Schlesinger was tremendously creative.
It was totally original. It was beautifully made, beautifully directed, beautifully performed.
This part, 6 minutes, catapulted me.
There weren't any development executives. We didn't discuss the plot line or any of that crap. We just made the movie.
You know, if you're enjoying the work, it was exciting to make that movie.
Jon had just come off of 2 years working on this big MGM movie, Far from the Madding Crowd, and he really wanted something totally different. He wanted to work with a real gutsy American writer on some American material.
Schlesinger and I had met years before that. I'd seen A Kind of Loving and Billy Liar, and I just flipped for this guy's work, and I flew to England to meet him.
A young American artist in London sent Jon a book by James Leo Herlihy called Midnight Cowboy. Jon told me about it, and I said, what is this Midnight Cowboy? Is it like a John Wayne Western or something like that? Oh, he said, hardly. You read this. And I did. I came back the next day, and I said, whoa, you can't, it's great. It's great. It's outrageous. You can't make this movie. It's too wild. It's too X-rated, and no one will ever make it. No studio would touch it. And he said, precisely. I made up my mind. I'm going to make it.
We talked maybe once or twice over the next year, maybe 2. And then I got a call from him one day, and he said, look, I've read a book. He said, you're going to hate it, maybe. But he said, I really think we could make a wonderful movie out of this book. Would you read it? I read the book. And we had 2 or 3 transatlantic conversations, and it was clear that we were on the same page. We talked about certain fundamentals, uncompromised, that the only way to do Midnight Cowboy was to really deal with it.
Waldo had written some wonderful pages for a story about a Vietnam draft dodger, which Jerry Hellman had found. And Jon fell in love with Waldo's work.
The style that Waldo was writing in, this kind of staccato New York, interrupted by, was everything that Jon and I have been talking about. And I got a cable back from Jon saying, hire Waldo Salt and start working immediately.
He'd started as a very young man as a screenwriter and had a wonderful career, and then he was blacklisted, and it was a very big break for him. He was well into his 50s, and he'd had a really hard time. This was like the phoenix rising out of the ashes in terms of a career, for him to have this opportunity, and he knew it.
John Schlesinger, Waldo Salt, and Jerry Hellman worked on the screenplay, made a whole bunch of changes and additions, and reinterpreted the book, if you will.
We went to work together, mostly out in Malibu, in a house that Jon rented. And that became our routine. We'd meet in the morning, we'd talk until we reached a point where we'd say, Waldo, write it.
He was a great believer in the notion that dialogue was the last thing to come into a scene, that scenes were not about the dialogue, that the difficult part of screenwriting had to do with finding the image and the action in the scene.
When I first approached Dustin, I'd sent them the book of Midnight Cowboy because there was no script that was worth reading at that time, and they'd read it, and Dustin, in effect, said, yes, I want to play this.
When people would compliment me about the character, I would say, it's in the book. That character is so delineated in the book, and he spent pages and pages describing Enrico Rizzo.
Mike Nichols called and wanted to test him for Graduate. They called me and said, would this prevent him from doing Midnight Cowboy? We said, absolutely not. He went out, he tested, he was a huge success. When he came back to us, he was on his way to being a huge star.
Graduate was just huge and made Dustin an international star overnight.
It was the first place I met John Schlesinger in Times Square. He'd seen The Graduate, and he didn't think I was right. And I asked if I could meet him at Horn and Hardart, which was on 42nd Street, about 3 in the morning.
And in fact, I had auditioned for Jon by dressing up as Ratso in a sort of seedy coat, and walking down 42nd Street with John, going into Nathan's or trying to get into Sardi's and being thrown out.
Somebody gave me the book Midnight Cowboy and said, you should play the part.
Every young actor in town knew this was the part of the decade. It was a star-making part.
And it was going to go without me because I tried to get in. I couldn't get in the door, this and all this. And finally, called my agent up. I said, is Midnight Cowboy going again? I said, yeah. I said, what are they doing? He said, well, they're screen testing now, John. They're pretty much down to who they want. I said, who's casting it? He said, Marion Doherty. I said, call Marion, tell her I'm coming into New York. I'm leaving tonight.
She's the one who said to us finally, look, you're testing 6 other people, for Christ's sakes. Test Jon Voight.
Schlesinger says, well, John, I tell you what, you're an interesting young man. And we've already got 3 boys we're auditioning. But, why don't you, when Waldo go off and read the script a little bit? And if Waldo thinks it's appropriate, you can come and we'll audition you as well.
We put each actor in front of a white screen. Waldo Salt pretended to be a really nasty talk show host. And there was no script. They had to deal with this extemporaneously.
My dad was off screen going, look at you, nobody buys that dumb cowboy act anymore. What are you standing there all, he would insult him as the interviewer and make Joe Buck kind of rise up and defend himself and talk about himself. And it really revealed a Joe Buck that is in the movie.
What makes you think you got something that you can sell to women?
Because I know it. That's what I got.
What you got?
You. That's what I got on you.
I called Dustin and asked him to come up and look at the tests. And he did. And, he hated being in that position, and he said that. He didn't want to be choosing between actors and all that. But he understood the question, and we asked him, okay, who's better? And Dustin said, look, I don't know who's better or not, but he said, what I found was that when the other actor was on the screen with me, I was looking at myself. When Jon Voight was on the screen with me, I was looking at Jon Voight. And I remember that so clearly, and that was it.
With Joe Buck, there's certain things that sparked me when I read it. One is this humor. I found him to be very humorous. I was interested in the adventures of Joe Buck.
Jon Voight and I, we traveled around Texas together, out in Midland and Odessa.
I was very taken, and something I really liked about the Southern gentleman, the aspect of yes or no, sir. I found that all these young people had that. There's a sweetness in it, and that was Joe to me. I said, Joe has that sweetness. He's got it from the culture. He's not a coarse person, even though he's involved in some very bizarre stuff. He's just a country boy, And there was a self-consciousness about Joe Buck that was immediately interesting to me.
The mirror images that you remember from the film came from the inner life of the character and his own inner insecurity. Every time we saw the mirror in which he could check himself and sort of contrast himself against the surroundings and rehearse his actions.
He was striving to belong somewhere. That's what his journey was about, He had no family, he had no moorings. But then there's the suspense. What's going to happen to Joe? He just gave 20 here, 20 there to the other guy. He's got no... Oh, man, this is tough. And then just at the bottom, in comes Mr. Hoffman as Ratso. and there they are, meeting at the bar.
I thought Dustin brought so much to the movie. And I really think it's one of his 4 or 5 greatest performances.
I remember Dusty came in and he had gone to this dentist who he got this set of teeth. And I was so jealous of Dusty's ugly teeth and his perfect limp. I mean, that limp was like the broken-winged bird, like this little flip of his feet and stuff. And I knew I had to find a proper walk for Joe, too. And we actually shot a couple of little pieces very early, and I had to come up with it quick. And they're in the film. Those little pieces are in the film.
The image of the character to me was this man who I had, the limp that he had, in following him, I remember a particular day, is he actually stopped on 42nd Street to cross the street. I think it's 7th Avenue. And people crowd up at certain times of the day, and it was that kind of a day, as I remember, where people kind of crowd up, and once the signal breaks to green, there's kind of a race, a New York City race to get to the other side of the street. And he won. And I thought that was an indication of something I wanted to have in a character, that Ratso, with his deformity, would, in spite of it, come in first. That was something about the character. He was such a survivor.
We rehearsed Midnight Cowboy very much like a play is rehearsed.
On The Graduate, we had 3-4 weeks rehearsal. And lo and behold, we had the same thing on Midnight Cowboy. And I don't know if I've ever worked on any two films that had that kind of preparation, delineating character work and letting the director get a feel as to how he wanted to shoot it, and bringing a cinematographer on just the room that we had with marked off tape on the ground like you do when you're rehearsing a play, little lines for steps and, and that stuff. And so much of the stuff that was discovered for Midnight Cowboy came from the room.
I remember one day I was reading somebody, and all of a sudden I wasn't acting. The switch had been made. I said, oh, there it is. I got it.
Dustin, he'll do anything to find a character.
Magnificent moments, from my perspective, came out of that. Pretending to fall down stairs, just in a room where we didn't have any stairs, where Ratso falls down the stairs.
They did these unbelievably brilliant improvs where they could just go on and on forever.
Waldo was with us every step of the way. And if they did an interesting improvisation that lasted, 5 minutes, he cut it down to 5 lines. But the essence of it was in the script.
Waldo Salt, the screenwriter, sitting there, I think with a Wallensack tape recorder, no video cameras in those days, and taping every improvisation that we did. And Jon Schlesinger entreating us to do improvisation after improvisation after improvisation, to find the real intimacy as actors.
The greatest pleasure for me very often was to go in and watch Joe and Ratso play these scenes together.
They were both so completely clear about their characters, and they both had, I think, magnificent sense of humor about their characters.
Voight and I loved improvising. We never stopped. We did it at lunchtime. We were the characters constantly because we just enjoyed it. It was very exciting to us to try to once we hit on, what do these guys talk about? And Schlesinger would sidle over and he'd start laughing because we were getting off. And he'd say, what is that? And then he put it on film. And there's a scene on the screen that came out of him overhearing us at lunch where one of us says to the other, because it was just fun to try to figure these guys out. So if you were reincarnated, what would you come back at?
When I read the script, it was these two characters, but they brought it to life in a way that was absolutely unique.
And the moment of putting my head, I think, which we found in rehearsal, just resting it on Voight's chest, the audience knows they're seeing something that the characters are not consciously aware of. They're seeing an intimacy at its birth between these two guys.
You'd have to be brain dead not to realize that you were seeing two superb actors just, pushing each other higher and higher and higher and demanding more and more of each other.
We're doing everything we could within our techniques and within our imaginations and within every bone of our, to get something real to happen between us, to provoke real life.
And then suddenly there you are with the camera and the lights and everything, and you're falling short. You always do. You're just never delivering what you want to deliver. And we were able to use each other. And Jon would come up. We sensed very early on that we wanted, if I'm going to be better in this than you, I'm going to be better with you being your best. That was implicit somehow. And that moves me to this moment. And that will never leave us.
I have to say, John Schlesinger's eye for casting this piece with people like John MacGyver and Bernard Hughes, Bobby Balaban, and his eye was something special.
The casting director was Marion Doherty, and she knew where the good New York actors were hidden, and she brought them in, and we read everybody.
Whoa, when Sylvia Miles came in, and they were thinking of another actress, very good actress, who could have done a very good job with it, but was very well known. Here's a person that no one would ever have seen before, and I liked the idea of the audience seeing these people as real people.
When I went and read for that part with Jon Voight, I tell you, I was going to get that part if it killed me.
And she gave that reading, and we went, I said, oh boy, we got to get her. She's a hot one, boy. She brings it to the table. She's not afraid of anything. He was a perfect dupe, but he had that kind of confidence, see? So he's up there and does his little charm thing, see? And it's like, he takes the bait and the hook, And then the way Sylvia did it, of course, it was immediately so interesting and so somehow authentic.
I did not do this part and I didn't think it was necessary to be liked, to be admired, to be liked. It had a function in a crazy way.
He's just a soft-hearted guy, Joe. He's a sweetheart. And he feels basically, it's a funny thing you ask for money. So I was about to ask you for some. And there's that beautiful moment. He says, here you want some money. You just can't stand to see a girl cry. And he's that country boy. And he says, here, what you want? You want 10? She takes a 20. 20? There you go, girl. Gives her a slap on the butt. He tries to make it out with his dignity. I mean, it's so beautiful. So many layers to it, aren't there?
He has to be taken by her. She has to take him. She got the money. She out-hustled the hustler.
John MacGyver played this wacky evangelist in this tenement, this apartment building. And it was a crazy scene and a great scene. So much in that scene, commentary and stuff. But the real heart of it is the energy between these two guys.
Barnard Hughes was another magnificent man.
Bernard Hughes, remember we were doing a scene where I turn on him because I'm desperate. And that's exactly what he wants me to do, some sick part of him. And I hit him, and he had false teeth. And I don't know whether John suggested or he suggested, maybe if he hits me, I'd lose my teeth. Well, it's that kind of the non-vanity of the real artist. He doesn't care what he looks like. He was trying to do this role, make it grotesque. And it was so beautifully done,
I think Brenda is sly and funny and wicked and sexy.
John Schlesinger saw her on Broadway, and I know for certain that Marion Doherty was involved in that, too.
New York in 1960s was just booming in terms of influences, in terms of breaking down the barriers, social, cultural, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed watching it and really soaking it in.
John had always had a fascination with America, but this is his first big stay, and he fell in love with it, and with the absurdities and the excesses.
Being an outsider, as John was and as I was, that we have a certain observation about America, that an American would just see something strange happen and won't think anything about it.
Because it was new to John, he saw things that the rest of us simply didn't see. I mean, I was born and raised in New York. I was so used to people falling down or people fighting in doorways, but it didn't register for me. Every single thing registered for John. He saw it and he was, oh my God, this is insanity. This has to be in the movie.
John Schlesinger and Adam Hollander had a very specific vision of what the movie should look like, this grittiness of New York streets and a very contemporary look for that time.
The major goal was to find the way to portray the innocence of the Joe Buck character. So on one hand, it had to look real. On the other hand, we're trying to light him in a way that would sort of accentuate his innocence. John is a tall fellow, so all you had to do is to throw him on Fifth Avenue and 52nd Street, put a 1200 millimeter lens 3 blocks away, and have him walk through the crowd, and he would always pop up from the crowd.
We had actually gone down to a site where some buildings were being demolished down in the lower village on the east side. And John had originally wanted to film the X-Flat on that location, but there was no water, there was no power, there were no toilets. It was rat-infested. It would have been a disaster. Our designer, John Robert Lloyd, who was also brilliant, he said, look, leave it to me. I can give you this in the studio. And, you know, we said, oh, you can never get the realism in the studio. He said, trust me. He got permission from the city, and he tore this apartment out. And he brought it all to the studio. You walk into that set with the grimy shades with the X's on them and the filth on the windows and the stink of urine. Boy, you got in there and you thought you were down in this tenement. He did it absolutely brilliantly.
It was a large part of the concept of grimy, cold, unpleasant life of Ratzo on the streets of New York, as opposed to imaginary sequences if they score and get themselves to Florida. And those two looks played against each other. And the basic idea was to photograph scenes in New York in a underexposed, cold, bluish, grayish tones, and imaginary sequences in Florida, for example. We overexpose almost 2 stops, intercut. Those two looks, I think, worked well for the scenes.
It's sun, oranges, juice, it's health. It's I will be healthy.
One of my jobs that John Schlesinger and Jerry Hellman gave me was to, bring back all the Warhol superstars and freaks and anybody I could round up to be in that great party sequence.
We ended up on a stage in a set that was almost exactly the replica of Warhol's studio. Warhol participated in dressing and loaned us a lot of his art and a lot of his friends.
That party sequence was literally a party that went on, I think, for about 1 or 2 weeks. The camera crew suddenly said, I think we're really just a documentary crew. And they just went around shooting everybody.
Flashbacks were a big deal with this film. How do we include this much information? How do we get people to the table so that they know who Joe is, so they can respond with him to the different circumstances? How do we set the story? And they went and shot all these little pieces to establish this background.
That was all absolutely planned from the start. The backstory on Joe Buck was that he was a kid who was kicked from pillar to post. His mother went off to work in a war factory, and he went to live with Grandma Sally Buck.
You could just feel everything about Joe Buck from those few moments.
She had a series of men in her life, mostly cowboys, who were gentlemen callers. The cowboy images of sex and romance all being tied up with the idea of boots and saddles. So this was a profound influence on this guy who connected masculinity, sexuality with cowboys.
Annie was the first person that made Joe Buck feel like he was a lover. He was too dumb to know that you don't kiss the town slut. And her feeling for him imbued him with his own power, so that it's what gave him this sense that he was somebody.
We used black and white film, and we mixed it with color. We used it in New York streets as well and subways. And I think it gave the overall look of the film another dimension.
If you didn't bring your brains to the party, you wouldn't know what was going on. It'd just be a lot of images and flashlights and all that.
It has a very unconventional first 2 or 3 reels until he meets Ratso, and then the narrative kind of, the progressive narrative kicks off. Up until then, it's back and forth, and I don't know if an audience is, they're so programmed today for linear, almost simplistic storytelling, unfortunately, that I think it was much more sophisticated than most films today. In all the films I've done, it ranks at the top of a director carrying out an artistic vision without any compromise.